everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
You have a new poll out on the Michigan Senate race, and Michigan's a really interesting state, right? It was one of those 7 battleground states in 2024. It ultimately went to President Trump after going for Biden in 2020. But it's a bit of a split ticket in that year in 2024 because there was also a Senate race, and the Democrat Alyssa Slotkin won by a razor-thin margin. Last year, Michigan Senator Gary Peters, he's a Democrat, announced he wasn't seeking re-election, so his seat is going to be up for grabs. So to start off the conversation, talk to us about what you're seeing in the Michigan Democrat primary.
Yeah, and a lot of folks have been watching this primary, Brittany. I think it's pretty interesting. We've got 3 candidates here, all of whom seem to be pretty viable among the Democratic electorate and potentially in the general election, as we'll see a little bit later. So right now, as things stand, we have Mallory McMorrow in the lead with 22%, Haley Stevens with 17%, and Abdul El Sayed with 16%. Now, 38% are still undecided, so that's a pretty big number here. And these results are within the margin of error. That lead that McMorrow has is within the margin. And so I do think that this race is still open. I think any one of these 3 candidates could pull through in the end.
If I'm one of these 3 candidates in this race and I'm listening to you describe these numbers, I'm feeling pretty good, right? You're saying all 3 are viable. It's a pretty competitive race. But if you boil down what you're seeing right now, boil down where people are breaking, what do the demographics look like? Who's going for which candidate?
Yeah, and this was interesting. So we see some age differences here. El Sayed is winning primarily among the 18 to 29 demographic. He does best there, and he gets worse as you go through the ages. Now, interestingly, McMorrow is doing worse among the 18 to 29 demographic. I wasn't necessarily expecting that since she's had a bit of a breakthrough in some social media and some of her ads. So that's really, we don't see any evidence of that resonating here. But she is doing well among the oldest demographic. And that's going to be very important, as we just discussed before in these primary elections. Those voters, those older voters, they are the bread and butter of these primaries, and they are the most likely to turn out. So if I'm McMorrow and I see that number where she is leading among the 60 plus demographic, that's great news, and I would feel really good about that.
None of these candidates have too high of a national profile, but when you're looking at the state of Michigan, do voters recognize them? Do they have high name recognition? Do people approve of these people? What does that really look like?
Yeah, and overall, they don't have super high name recognition. So when we look at McMorrow, for instance, 23% have a favorable opinion, 12% have an unfavorable opinion, and 65% don't have an opinion one way or another or don't know who she is. So that sort of follows with the other candidates. The only differences we really see is that El Sayed has an overall net negative favorability rating. But by and large, these candidates aren't super well known, and yet they still perform reasonably well in some of these general election tests.
We always talk about this, that undecided chunk. And right now, that's where most voters are in this primary, right? The undecided is at 38%. So if these 3 candidates don't have much or that high of name recognition, how much does that undecided matter here?
It's going to matter a lot. These are the voters who have yet to be convinced. These are probably some of the voters who aren't necessarily sure about whether they're going to turn out in the end. Now, this is likely voters. We think that this is our best guess to likely voters, but that's always going to include some folks in there who maybe haven't voted in primary elections in the past several years, and they're not sure but are leaning towards voting this year. So there's also going to be some turnout game that they'll have to spin up there. I think we also see that among undecided voters, women are more so undecided. Now, McMorrow is doing better among women, but with such a high undecided number among women, that's going to be, all of these candidates can be vying for that vote as well, when the majority of the electorate, probably well above 50%, are going to be women who vote in the Democratic primary.
You also tested these three candidates against former Congressman Mike Rogers. He's a Republican who's running for Senate as well. He was defeated by Alyssa Slotkin by less than 20,000 votes in the 2024 Senate race. So when you're looking at the hypothetical matchups, what did you find?
And we find that all of the Democrats here are competitive against Mike Rogers. So starting with McMorrow, we see 46% for McMorrow versus 43% for Rogers. So that's a 3-point lead. That's nothing to sneeze at necessarily, but it is still within the margin of error. Stevens is at 47% versus Rogers at 42%. Again, 5-point lead. That's good, but still, of course, within that margin of error. And then El Sayed does the worst, comparatively speaking. He is tied with Rogers both at 43% with 15% undecided. So I think the moral here is that it's going to be a competitive general election come November. On the whole, I think I'd rather be one of the Democratic candidates. I think in this election year, it's going to be tough for Republicans in some of these purple or swing states. And that's going to carry over into Michigan. It was competitive in 24. It'll definitely be competitive in 2026.
Sometimes when we're talking about these races, we look at the governor's approval rating or the president's approval rating to kind of get clues from there. So you're saying you'd rather be a Democrat here. The state has a Democrat governor, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She has a national profile. What do people think about her? And then what do people think about President Trump? Because this state went for President Trump in 2024. It took a break in 2020, went for President Trump again back in 2016.
Yeah, that's right. So Trump won the state in 2024, but right now we see that he is at a deficit here. 43% approve of his job performance versus 51% who disapprove. So that is not necessarily what I want to see if I'm a Republican on the ballot. I think that this probably was impacted by some recent events in the Midwest. I think we all know what I'm talking about there. And then when we look at Whitmer's approval, we see 48% approve versus 40% disapprove. So she has managed to keep her approval numbers up here, possibly even gained since the November election in 2024 when we last tested Michigan. So again, Democrats looking much better here, generically at least, and with their leaders than with Republicans.
If I'm one of those three candidates here in the Democratic primary, I'm thinking, I don't really have that high of name recognition, but good news, neither do my competitors here. So what I would do is try to differentiate myself by thinking about the top issues the people in my state care about and then go and try to message that way. So when you're looking at those issues, what exactly are they?
Yeah, and so the top issues overall, of course, the economy at 40%. We've gotten used to hearing that. Threats to democracy, 15%, healthcare, 12%, and then immigration is relatively low at 8%. When we look at Democrats specifically, we see that the economy is still their top issue, but it's only 29% versus that 40% for the general electorate as a whole. And then threats to democracy is very close, 28%. I think that that's somewhere that the candidates could differentiate themselves. I know that a lot of other Democrats are doing the same things there, but I think that that is worth concentrating on. And then healthcare, 17%, so somewhat higher than the general electorate. That could also be another area to concentrate their campaigns on, especially given some of the changes to the ACA this year and subsidies. I think that that could resonate with voters for sure.
Matt Taglia, I always appreciate your polling and our conversations. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thanks so much, Brittany.